The morning started like any other for Claire. Grey clouds pressed against the city windows, the hum of printers filling the silence of her law office. She sat behind her desk, her hands moving over reports she barely read. Her mind had been wandering lately, caught between the life she built and the one she had lost. It had been 3 years since her divorce. 3 long years of learning how to be alone again. Her work had become her armor, her escape, and sometimes her excuse. She told herself she didn't need anyone, that her world was fine just the way it was. But deep down, a quiet emptiness lingered. When the door opened, she didn't look up right away, expecting her assistant. Then she heard a voice she hadn't heard in years. Warm, calm, and unmistakably familiar. "Claire," he said. And her heart skipped. She lifted her gaze, and time seemed to stop for a second. Ethan Hayes stood there, tall, confident, his sharp blue eyes holding that same quiet intensity she remembered from college. It had been almost a decade, but something about him felt unchanged. "Ethan," she said, her tone somewhere between shock and disbelief. He smiled softly. "Didn't expect to see me here, huh?" "Not exactly," she said, forcing a small smile. "What are you doing in Chicago?" "Work," he replied, setting his briefcase on the edge of her desk. "My firm sent me to handle a corporate case, turns out." "Your company's our client," her chest tightened. "You're with Halstead & Co. now." "Yeah," he said. "Transferred from New York last month. I didn't realize you'd be part of this project." His voice had a steadiness that used to calm her back when life was simpler. They had been friends once, close friends, maybe even more, though neither had ever said it out loud. Life had moved too fast, and she had chosen a different path, one that led her into a marriage that eventually fell apart. "Guess it's a small world," she said, pretending to sound casual. "Smaller than I thought," he replied quietly. Their eyes met for just a moment longer than necessary. Then she looked away, reaching for a folder just to keep her hands busy. He glanced around her office, his gaze landing on the small photo of her and her younger sister on the shelf. "You did well, Claire," he said gently. "You always said you'd have your own office one day." She smiled, but there was a flicker of sadness in her eyes. "Yeah, I guess I did." They talked about the project, the case files, and what the next few weeks would look like. She tried to focus on the details, but his voice made it difficult. There was something about Ethan's calm confidence, the way he leaned slightly forward when he spoke, the familiarity in his tone. It all felt too close, too dangerous. He noticed her ring finger was bare but said nothing. Instead, he asked how she'd been, and she gave the kind of answer people give when they don't want to tell the truth. "Busy," she said. "Work's been non-stop." He smiled knowingly. "That sounds like you." After a short meeting, he stood to leave. "We'll meet the rest of the team tomorrow. I'll email you the brief tonight." She nodded. "Standing too?" "Sure. Good seeing you again." "Ethan, you too," he said softly, pausing at the door. "It's been a long time." "Yeah," she whispered. "It has." Then he left, closing the door behind him. For a long time, Claire just stood there, her heart still beating faster than it should. She sat down again, staring at the papers in front of her, trying to convince herself that this was nothing, just an old friend resurfacing. But the way he'd looked at her, calm, curious, almost searching, made her feel things she thought she had forgotten how to feel. That evening she worked late, though she barely got anything done. She caught herself glancing at the clock, wondering if he'd sent that email yet, wondering why she cared. By the time she finally packed up, the office was empty. The city outside glowed with streetlights and moving headlights. She drove home, her thoughts a blur between the past and present. When she reached her apartment, she poured herself a glass of wine and sat by the window. The rain began to fall, steady and soft, tapping against the glass in rhythm with her thoughts. She tried to read, tried to distract herself, but all she could think of was Ethan's face, the calm in his voice, the quiet strength that used to draw her in years ago. She remembered the last time she saw him, a summer evening before graduation. Sitting on a park bench after hours of laughter, he had told her he'd been offered a job in New York. She had smiled and congratulated him, even though she'd secretly wished he would stay. He had leaned in as if to say something, but stopped himself. And that moment had stayed frozen in her memory ever since. Now, all those emotions she'd locked away were finding cracks to escape through. And it scared her. She had built walls, routines, and a life that didn't depend on anyone. But one afternoon, one unexpected meeting, had shaken all of it before going to bed. She checked her phone. There it was. A message from Ethan. Great seeing you again today. Looking forward to working together. Simple words. But her heart reacted like it used to years ago. She turned off the light, lying awake for hours, trying to convince herself that this was nothing, that she was older, wiser, stronger. But when she closed her eyes, all she could see was Ethan walking through her office door, smiling the way he did years ago. And in that quiet darkness, she admitted something she hadn't said in years. She had lost control the moment he walked in. Not of herself, but of the emotions she thought were gone forever. The next morning, Claire arrived at the office earlier than usual. She told herself it was just another day. But her stomach said otherwise. The air felt heavier. The kind of quiet that meant something was about to change. She tried to distract herself with work, burying her focus in contracts and emails. But when the elevator doors opened and Ethan stepped out, her heart betrayed her again. He greeted her with that calm smile. "Morning, Claire." "Morning," she said quickly, pretending to check her laptop. He placed his briefcase on the table beside hers. "You always were an early riser. Some things don't change," she said. Forcing a grin, he looked around her office, noticing the small plant on her desk and the framed quote on the wall. "Still love your little details," he said softly. And she looked up just in time to see the sincerity in his eyes. They began discussing the project, numbers, client expectations and strategies. Everything about it should have felt routine. But it didn't. Every time he spoke, she caught herself watching his face, his gestures, the way he paused when he thought. The familiarity between them made every silence feel charged, every laugh too easy, every glance too long. At one point, he moved closer to point something out on her laptop. His shoulder brushed hers for just a second, but it was enough to send a wave of heat through her. She froze, hoping he didn't notice. But he did, his voice lowered slightly. "You okay?" "Yeah," she said too quickly. "Just tired." He smiled faintly. "You were always bad at lying." She met his eyes then, and for a heartbeat, neither looked away. The sound of the phone ringing broke the moment. Claire answered, her tone professional again. But her thoughts were miles away. When she hung up, Ethan had gone quiet, studying her the way someone studies a memory they didn't expect to relive. By lunchtime, they'd finished most of the meeting notes. He asked if she wanted to grab coffee. "It's been years, Claire. I think we're overdue." She hesitated for a second, then nodded. "Sure." They walked to a small cafe down the street, a place she used to visit when she needed space. The smell of roasted beans and rain-soaked air filled the space. They found a quiet corner, and for a few minutes, it almost felt like old times again. He told her about New York, the long hours, the constant pressure, the loneliness that came with success. She told him about the divorce, about how she rebuilt her life. It wasn't easy, she said, stirring her coffee. But I learned how to start again. Ethan's eyes softened. I'm sorry you had to go through that. She shrugged. It taught me a lot about who I am. And who's that? He asked. She smiled faintly. Someone stronger, I think. He leaned back, studying her. You were always strong, Claire. You just didn't see it. His voice carried warmth, not pity, and it hit her harder than she expected. When they left the cafe, the sky was overcast again. A light drizzle falling, he offered to walk her back. And she didn't refuse. They walked side by side. Quiet but comfortable. At the building entrance he paused. I'm glad we ran into each other. Me too, she said before she could stop herself. That afternoon they worked smoothly together, sharing ideas and laughing at old memories. For the first time in years, Claire felt alive, not just busy or accomplished, but seen. When Ethan spoke to her, he didn't look at her like a coworker or a stranger. He looked at her like he remembered every version of who she'd been. As the day ended, a storm rolled in, thunder echoing in the distance. Most of the office left early, but Claire stayed to finish a few notes. Ethan lingered too, pretending to double-check documents. You don't have to stay, she told him. He smiled. Neither do you. She looked up, realizing how quiet it was, how close they were again. Lightning flashed through the window, illuminating the room, and for a moment their eyes met. The air between them thickened, not with words, but with all the things they weren't saying. It's funny, he said softly, how some people never really leave your life. Even when they do. Claire swallowed. You think that's what we are? Just people who never left? He smiled sadly. Maybe we were never meant to. She looked away, her heart racing. Ethan, this isn't a good idea. I know, he said, his tone low, steady, but it's the truth. Before she could respond, the lights flickered again, and they both laughed softly. Breaking the tension, he grabbed his coat. I should go before the rain gets worse. She nodded. Yeah, as he reached the door. He turned back. I'll see you tomorrow. Of course, she said. He hesitated. Good night, Claire. Good night, Ethan. When the door closed, she let out the breath she'd been holding. The room felt too quiet, too full of something she couldn't name. She walked to the window, watching the rain blur the city lights. Somewhere inside, a storm of her own had started. Later that night, as she sat in bed, her phone buzzed. A message from Ethan lit the screen. Couldn't sleep. Thanks for today. It felt like old times. She read it twice, her heart both aching and racing. She typed back slowly. Yeah, it did. And when she hit send, she knew she had just crossed a line she couldn't ignore, because sometimes losing control didn't mean chaos. It meant remembering how it felt to feel again. ChatGPT said. The next morning, Claire woke up early, her thoughts still tangled from the night before. The message from Ethan replayed in her mind, each word pulling at something she thought she'd buried. She told herself it was nothing, just two old friends catching up. But deep down, she knew it was more than that. Something had shifted, and pretending otherwise was useless. At the office, things felt different. People moved through the halls as usual, but every time Ethan walked by, her heartbeat picked up. They didn't talk much at first, a quiet understanding hanging between them. When they finally sat down to review documents, the air felt charged again. It wasn't about what was said. It was the pauses, the glances, the tension that filled the space like unspoken words. Ethan kept his tone professional, but his eyes betrayed him. They softened every time they met hers, and it made her chest ache. After a few hours, he leaned back, stretching slightly. "You look tired," he said gently. "Didn't sleep much," she admitted. "Too many thoughts." "Same," he said quietly. "Guess we're both restless," she smiled faintly. "Maybe we should focus on work then." He laughed. "Yeah, before we start overthinking everything." But his smile faded quickly, replaced by something more serious. "Claire, I need to ask. Are you okay with this? Us working together like this?" She hesitated. "Why wouldn't I be?" "Because," he said carefully, "it feels like we're walking on old ground. And I don't want to make things harder for you." She took a breath. "Ethan, I'm fine. We're adults. We can handle this." But even as she said it, she wasn't sure she believed it. That afternoon, they had to meet with a client in another building. The meeting went smoothly, but afterward, when they stepped outside, the weather had turned, the wind picked up. Grey clouds rolling over the skyline, they ran to the parking garage, laughing as the rain began to fall harder. For a few moments, it was just like years ago, carefree and easy. As they reached his car, both soaked, Ethan paused, his smile fading. "You know, I missed this," he said softly. "What?" she asked, catching her breath. "Us," he replied, talking, laughing, feeling like the world makes sense for a minute. She looked at him, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's dangerous to miss something you can't have." He held her gaze. "Maybe, but that doesn't stop it from being real." Her heart thudded painfully. "Ethan," that she couldn't finish. He stepped closer, close enough that she could feel his breath, but not enough to cross the line. "You don't have to say it," he whispered. "I know." They stood there in the sound of rain, neither speaking, both trapped between what they wanted and what they shouldn't want. Finally, he stepped back, breaking the spell. "Come on, let's get you home." The drive was quiet, the kind of silence that carried too much meaning. When he stopped in front of her apartment, she turned to thank him, but the words felt heavy. He gave her a small smile. "Good night." "Claire." She hesitated. "Ethan, wait." He looked at her, his eyes tired but kind. "Yeah? This, whatever's happening, it can't," she said softly. "It'll only hurt us both." He nodded slowly. "I know. I just needed to see you one last time and know you're really okay." "And now?" she asked. "Now," he said quietly. "I'll try to let it go." She watched him drive away, her chest tight. Every part of her wanted to believe it was over, but the ache inside said otherwise. That night, she couldn't sleep. She kept thinking of how close they'd come to something they couldn't undo. The next day, she found an envelope on her desk. No name, just her initials on the front. Inside was a letter in Ethan's handwriting. "Claire, I didn't plan for any of this. Seeing you again reminded me how much I missed not just you, but who I was when you were around. I don't want to ruin what you've built, but I had to tell you the truth. You still mean something to me." Always have her eyes filled. She sat there for a long time, staring at the words. When she finally looked up, Ethan was standing by the doorway, watching her quietly. She wiped her tears and stood. "Why did you give me this?" "Because I didn't want to leave things unsaid," he replied. "I'm leaving tomorrow, transferring again. They need me in Boston." Her throat tightened. "So this is goodbye?" He nodded. "Unless you tell me not to go." She froze. Her heart racing, there was so much she could say. But none of it would make it right. She finally whispered, "You should go." His smile was sad. "I thought you'd say that." He walked toward her. And for a second, it felt like time slowed. He took her hand gently. "Take care of yourself." "Claire, you too," she said. Her voice breaking. Then he left. Weeks passed. And life returned to its rhythm. But nothing felt the same. The office was quieter. Her days felt longer. Still, there was peace in the silence. A strange comfort in knowing she had faced her heart and chosen herself this time. One evening, months later, she got a postcard in the mail. The handwriting was familiar. "Boston's colder than I expected. But I think of Chicago whenever it rains. Hope you're smiling these days. E." She smiled faintly, placing the postcard on her desk beside the photo of her and her sister. Then she looked out the window, watching the city lights flicker against the dark sky. Her heart still carried the echo of what they almost had. But this time, it didn't hurt. It just reminded her that sometimes, losing control isn't about falling apart. It's about letting yourself feel something real, even if only for a moment. And in that quiet moment, Claire finally felt free.